Hi, I'm Janet George, the Grace Ambassador, and if you are not familiar with QCT6 and Plus version, then hopefully this will help you understand it a little better. The first thing I'm going to do is tap on Help and Settings. This isn't something you'll need to do every time. It's just to be aware it's there and make sure it's correct for your setup. My frame is a rolling rail, Evolution Elite. My long arm is a QCT21X Elite. The safe area I've already set. I'm using my laptop and I'm in simulation mode, so I just entered those amounts. My zone scale for width is 100% because with a rolling rail, you can go all the way from the left to the right. And the height is 95%. And the reason for that is as you quilt and advance your quilt onto that take-up rail that goes through the throat of your machine, then that 17 inches starts to decrease a little bit. So you want to make sure that your design is still going to work when you get to the bottom of your quilt. So that 95% instead of 100 is what helps you out. And I highly recommend that you tap on this blue question mark and it will explain all about the zone scale and its correlation with the safe area. Whoever wrote that did an outstanding job, and that will be very helpful to you if you have any questions about it. So then tap OK. And now we're going to double tap on Pantograph. Select and sew is for if you want to sew blocks or triangles, things like that. So we're going to double tap on Pantograph. And then this is the screen it opens up into. And in the top left, it says Panto Stacker. So each screen you go, that top left corner will tell you the name of the screen you're in. And then right next to it is the safe area that I told you I had set. If you were on a real quilt on a frame, you would have moved your machine back and to the left to the edge of your backing, and then move it forward and to the front right to the edge of your backing. And that's how you would set your safe area. But when you're in simulation mode, you just pick numbers. So look at this, 48 and 48. Your safe area width initially auto fills into the total width down here. You do not want to leave this at 48. It's recommended that your safe area width be 8 inches greater than what your total width is. That's so that you have a minimum of 4-inch margin on either side of your quilt. If you were to tap right now, if you had a design sitting there and you left it at 48 and you were to tap on sew in zones, this yellow light right here would be lit up and it would be letting you know it's going to be really hard to place your what's called a zone. So we'll be changing this. And then the other 17, you'll notice the height is 16.15. That's because if you say 17 times the 95%, that was the percent for a 21 inch, that gives you that 16.15, which should be the amount of inches vertically that you have between the rails to stitch within when you get toward the bottom of a typical quilt. And that includes queen and king. It might change for, say, a queen or king with minky backing and double batting. So, but normally for the average quilt, this works out. So this total height, you can either leave it there or you can decrease it. You just can't make it greater. So with plus, you are limited to 1 or 2 rows. 2 is the maximum you can have. So if you keep clicking on the plus, it's not going anywhere. It's staying on 2. So now we need to select a pattern. And the first pattern I'm going to select is non-nested. That's the very easiest pattern for you to start with. So we're going to say select pattern, and you can tap there or down toward the bottom. And continuous line are the patterns that have been with QCT for years. And when I tapped on patterns before I got to this screen, I tapped on patterns. There was a folder called Edge to Edge. And so these are all the patterns that's in this Edge to Edge folder. And so the first one we're going to do is the dog paw and I don't even know, BOWNES, but bones, dog paw and bones. So we're going to open. And now we need to know how many patterns across because it looks pretty funny with one. So you can either eyeball it and just tap on the plus till your eyes are happy, or if you really want to kind of keep the height and width ratios that this pattern was created with, you can tap on this row of hearts or this row of hearts. So just experiment with both of them if that's the route you want to go and see which one you like best. And so I'm going to start tapping the plus until these lines, these are the connecting lines, until they either almost touch or barely overlap. So I think I'm going to go with this one. And now, instead of leaving it down here, I'm going to go to the top because when I do that, there's a nice choice for making those ends nicely come together. So it went to the second choice of that top row, and this is one that you'll associate with ends that wrap from one end to the other. And maybe you see a tiny little bit of purple there. And then I want to show you this bottom one. Be very careful about using it because look right there. All of these patterns lack a little bit connecting. So you don't want that. And I'll be honest, I never use that bottom one. And down below in that little print, it'll tell you what your choice is doing. So that's saying it's nesting across the width. Okay, this one on top is one that you don't see the wrapping on the ends. And when you look at this, it looks really good like it is. And the reason it's non-nesting is because you can kind of tell a difference in these rows. In fact, I'm going to tap on alternate so that one is unselected. So now it's really easy. When it's unselected, it's got the lighter blue lines. The selected is darker blue. But you can see that this right here, that bottom part of that paw, that's the lowest stitch for this pattern right there. And so for this row down below it, the upper stitch is this right here, that little thing sticking up, that line. So they are right now touching that same line right there. And these blue grid lines represent 1 square inch. When you tap on options, it's this green check mark right there under Panto Stacker Show Grid. So if you don't see those blue 1 inch square grid lines and you want to see them, just come in here and tap there to get that green check mark and say, okay. So it'll make sense what I'm telling you when we go to sew in zones to the quilting screen. But this makes for an easy pattern is when the lowest stitch and the upper stitch look good being on that same, we're going to call it a line, being on that same line. They hit on the same place. Okay, so alternate down here, that's a toggle between the first row and the second row, odd or even. And then this is a toggle between all rows selected or no rows selected. And as you use plus and you use these chain options to make changes to your design, you need to make sure that the row is selected that you want to make the changes on. Sometimes I've had one row not selected and then I start changing the size and I want them both to be the same, make the same changes to, and I'm like, oh drat. So just pay attention to if you have the odd row or even, well, there's odd row or even row selected or all or none. So pay attention to that when you make changes. Okay, so now that we have this, maybe you want to stagger the second row. Maybe you like it just like it is. You like seeing bone, paw, but you just want to see what the second row might look like staggered. So we're going to select the second row, and you'll see those red diamonds are there in the corners. So we are going to tap on move. But before I do that, I just want to show you real quick. This size, move, flip, and rotate, whichever one of these selected, the options for it is in this area between. So when you tap on size, you have these icons, and these two right here go with that second and third row. These two are you're able to use them when you have that first row. So you won't be able to use those with that first row, but these are the ones you would want. So anyway, so that's what you see with size. With move, you see these arrows, and then with flip, then you have choices for flipping it horizontally or vertically, and that top choice of each one is with no flipping. Okay, so you could go through and just see what they all look like, but go back to the top, and then there's no flipping. And then rotate. You have to be very careful because look what happens when you rotate. Yeah, it gets ugly quick. So I'm going to tap on 0. So right now we want to see what'll happen if we stagger this second row, because some patterns do obviously look better staggered. So we're going to tap on move. And by me having this row selected and not that one, this is the only row that's going to move. If I tap stagger, then it will stagger by half a pattern's width, which most patterns that need to be staggered, that's the amount you want to stagger them. So just tap on the word itself, stagger, and now it shifts it half a pattern. And now you can see the purple lines letting you know that this row is staggered. Okay, you can take that away by tapping reset, and maybe you just want to just incrementally stagger, and your moves will be determined by the step size over here. So if you tap on that word medium, you'll see tiny, small, medium, big, jumbo. So you can choose whichever one you want. Tiny is great for when you're ready to fine tune the exact placement. So right now, if I were to tap on medium, it's going to move a medium amount, and you could play around and see what you think. We're going to tap on reset, and or we could leave it on. We could leave it on stagger. That might be fun. We'll just do that. Okay, so with this design, we're going to tap on all to get them all selected. We don't need to change the size. And when I say we don't need to change the size, that would be if that you would be doing it manually, so to speak. Like right now, it's just adjusting to the total height. And the row height will always be half of what the total height is. You know what? I'm going to change that to 16. Okay. Because, and let's see, I can do that and say max, and now we're good. Max returns it to the full size of the row it's in. So now each one is 8, and I think that's probably a nice size for this one. And you can just look at a design element. So here we have the paw. So that's 1, 2, 2.5 inches. And I think that's probably a pretty nice size for the paw. You definitely could make it bigger. When you're making a charity quilt, some people don't want to use any more thread than they have to. So they'll they'll make their design bigger just to quilt it out faster and use less thread. So certainly your choice what size you want. So now we are ready to quilt it. You always want to save your pattern first. So you're going to click on that Save Panto. And it's good to have a separate folder to save it in. So I have created one. It may take a while to get there. So let me see if I can't cancel. But this is the path. Once you save it, you may want to take a picture of that directory path so you can follow the folders to get to where your pattern is saved. And then when you open it later, you open it as a pantograph, not a patterns. But we're going to say cancel. So we're going to pretend like we've saved it, and this resume zone sewing session. When you tap sew in zones, it's going to prompt you to save, and that's where it's saving at. But because Plus only ever has one zone, you don't have multiples, that's when this comes in handy, is when you have the multiples. So there again, we don't need to do anything with the size. We've already staggered. We don't need to flip. We don't need to rotate. So just that quick, you're ready to sew in zones. And it is giving me the yellow. And remember what I said, if I don't change the total width and I leave it the safe area, there's that yellow. So I need to come down here and I need to say, I'm going to say 40. So we'll say, okay. And it may be that I need to reduce the patterns because that obviously looks a lot better. I could change it to 4. That looks a little stretched out. So now I would need to go back in there and resave, and it would say, do you want to overwrite? And I would say yes. So now you've seen what happens when the total width is left to be the safe area. So now we have a green light that lets us know that the total width easily fits in the safe area. So now we'll tap on Sew in Zones. And you may want to say, don't show me this message again. And we're going to say, no, we're not going to save it. Okay, so when you first get into this screen, your design is shifted to that top left corner, okay? That's because it's an unplaced zone. And you'll see this red line around here. That's your safe area, okay? And then this green is your zone. So the zone is referring to what you're able to stitch between the back and front rail on your frame where your machine is stitching at. So the first thing I'm going to do is tap on settings. There's a few things in here we want to make sure they're what we want. Sewing speed, that's how fast your machine is going to stitch. So slow is good for an intricate pattern. Medium is nice for a lot of them. If you had a very simple pattern, then fast would work. Tie-off count is how many stitches it's going to take when it first starts out and when it ends. So micro stitch is a toggle between back and forth and micro stitch. So be careful with my back and forth because you're going to have a buildup of stitches. So I have micro stitch selected. I also don't have automatic bobbin pull. I'm going to recommend that you try it both ways. Try it with automatic bobbin pull on, try it with it off. Stitches per inch. The more intricate your design is, the more you will want to increase your stitches per inch. And then the more open it is, then 10, 11, those work well. So we're going to say, okay. The other thing we want to do is go into Zone Manager. And it's letting you know if you've already placed your zone, then you're going to have to replace it. But we haven't done that, and we could always replace it anyway. So yes, we want to open. And now we see our zone 1. But like I said, when you have plus and a rolling rail, all you ever have is the one zone. So it doesn't really matter if that's checked or not. You have a magnifying glass up here. And I should point out that anytime you see these blue question marks, you can tap on that and get some good help if you want to just read up a little more about those choices. So with this zone number, it doesn't do me any good to click because I have rolling rail. So I have that one zone. And now here we have the zone sizing. So this, you will recall, matches what was in the settings from the home screen where we went in there. It's 100% width, 95% of the safe area height is good to stitch. And then it lets you know what that amount is in inches. So there we have the 17 safe area height times 95%, and that's the 16.15. Okay, over here, this top and bottom is very important. So this zone placement is a toggle between center or 4-point. And as you get used to using it, you may just want to do center because then you just have one placement spot to deal with, which is really nice. But as you get used to keeping the quilt straight on the rails and all of that, 4-point might be a nice selection for you. So we're going to leave it on 4-point. This next one is grayed out because of only one zone. If you had the Pro version, then this is active. And then you can say, okay, the second zone, I want it to start over here instead of over there. Okay, so the third one is sewing direction. So the first one, some people say my machine sews best just sewing left to right. So that's what that choice will do for you. It'll stitch all the way across. You'll stop and tie off, and then it'll start stitching back at the beginning over here on the left for the second row. And then if you have back and forth, it'll stitch across and do a jump stitch down, which is nice if you are stitching between borders, okay? And then this last one is continuous, which is the fastest. So it's going to stitch across, stitch straight down, and stitch right back across without you having to do anything. So if you're stitching to the raw edge of your quilt top or just off the raw edge, that's a great choice. So now that we have that all figured out, we're going to say, okay. So one other thing that I'm going to say no. One other thing that's nice to do is in plugins, and you have what's called marking tool. So marking tool when you're in Pantograph is you can use it to draw lines of something about your quilt top, the side edge, a border, just something that gives you a reference point on your screen that is really lined up with actually where it is on your quilt top. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw lines to reflect, we're going to say the raw edge of the quilt top, okay? But you would be placing that with I think with where you want the stitching to go to, okay? So we're going to just tap right there, and we're going to say add, and you'll see a little brown dot there. And then you're going to just follow the edge of your quilt top down. And maybe it's not exactly straight, a little bowed, maybe. Hopefully not too much. But in case it is, we're just going to go ahead and do this so you kind of get an idea. Okay, and now we want to do the same on the other side. So we tap on add marking to enter. Then we're going to come over here and we're just going to start there. And again, that would be at the top raw edge of your quilt top. We're going to say add. Then we're just going to kind of track down there, add. Maybe it's nice and straight. Maybe it's a little wavy. Okay, so when you have your side edges, then we're going to tap OK. So that I won't come back to this screen, I just want to point out that if you're using this to track those raw edges, as opposed to keeping your quilt straight on the rails, that's another use for them, is you're going to be coming in here and deleting these and creating new ones each time you advance your quilt. So the way that you would get rid of these is the one that's in blue is the one that's active. So this says points right there. So if you have one selected, you could say remove all. That would get rid of all of that. With number 2 selected, you say remove all. That gets rid of all of that. But it leaves you with your 1 and 2 in there. And then your level line is if you just want to have that straight line across. We'll just ignore that for now. I know there's a lot coming at you. So now we're ready to place our zone. So A is the first one to place. So you're placing it with where you want the leftmost stitches to hit at an intersection of where you want the top stitches to hit. So you're going to go to the top edge and it's your choice whether you're stitching a little bit off or right at the raw edge. And you do need to baste down your edges, okay? And if you don't have a glide foot, baste close to that raw edge so that if you stitch off when it stitches back, your foot won't catch that edge and flip it over. And when you baste the sides, I'm recommending that you stitch up and away from you, because if you always stitch down, that can do this slight stretching of your edges, and you get to the bottom of your quilt and you have a little bit of a frown between the side edges. So do baste up. Okay, so now we're going to move our needle to where we want the top edges to hit. and the leftmost stitches to hit. So I'm going to put it just a little bit outside that gray line and tap on A. And they're recommending that you mark that with either a piece of tape with needle hole punch in it or a blue marking pen, whatever you want to do. So we'll say okay. And now we'll come over here because we need to place our B. I'm going to make it a little bit outside. And this green line needs to stay straight. So if you placed it wonky and that green line is going down or up, do replace it again. And so now C and D are opened up. If your line was really straight on both sides, you probably don't need to do C and D. But if it's a little bit wavy, then it's a good thing to use C and D. So right now, lock width is not checked. That's what it looks like checked. So you don't want it checked because you want to be able to control the width. If you have that checked, regardless of where you tap, it's going to stitch that 40 inches width from the Panto screen. So we're going to leave it unchecked for the duration of the quilt. But the lock height, we're going to leave that checked because we want this height to keep stitching exactly what it is. So we want each row to be 8 inches. So right now, and I just want to show you that you can place C anywhere, okay? Because remember, the height is locked. So I could put C there. Look, I could go crazy and put D there. So, oh, now I'm out of the safe area. That's what happens when you get out of the safe area. You get a pink screen, and then you look for where is my design crossing into the red, and that lets you know where the mess up is. But you see how I can place C and D wherever I want to, as long as I'm not putting it out of safe area. But the height is staying locked. The height with that green arrow staying locked in. So I want and you know what? I'm going to change my mind just so you can fully appreciate this brown line. I'm going to go ahead and place A right on that line and B right on that line. Because remember, you can put those brown lines for to reflect whatever you want. So we're going to go ahead and say that this is the raw edge of the quilt top. Okay, so now we need to place C, and ideally we want the green line to line up with the brown line as much as we can get it. So what if I tap there? I wonder what if I were to tap there. So, oh, that's bad. So you just kind of want to, play around with it because you can, and that looks great. I'm fine with that. And so now this looks pretty straight. So I'll tap there and see what happens. Okay, that looks good. So now I'm ready to quilt this. I've placed my zone and it's going to line up just like I want it to with the side edges of my not perfectly straight quilt top. So the first thing I want to do is move my needle over where that green circle is, just so that I don't have to wait for the software to move my machine for me. It's a lot quicker if I'll move it manually. So now I want to pull bobbin. And if you'll watch that, you'll watch it go across and it does its little thing. And of course, are in simulation mode, but you can see it kind of take a stitch. So kind of watch that right now. I'm tapping on pull bobbin. So see, it did its little dip down. And so now you need to pull the bobbin thread up. So the machine is going to kind of release a little bit, and you can take your upper thread and floss underneath your needle, or maybe you have some a fingernail file you can run underneath there. Just a pencil, just something to run underneath there to grab that bobbin thread and pull it out straight. So now you have two thread tails to hold. And when you tap on sew, hold those thread tails for a couple of stitches so that and pull them a little snug before you tap sew because you don't want any looseness in your thread pad. So hold them snug for a few and then we're going to tap on sew. So it's going to take those little micro stitches and then it's going to take off sewing. Well, what if you ran out of bobbin right off? Then you tap stop and then you have repair pattern, okay? And if you want to go ahead and release your machine, you can say release carriage. QCT is still in control, but you're able to move the machine out of your way. And what you're going to do is you're going to unsew enough of the last stitches and don't stop at a point, okay? Unsew until you're in a smooth kind of area, shall we say, and then pull that bobbin thread up and then tie a knot loose above the top of your quilt top. And if you can reach it now and take one of those self-threading needles and bury those two thread tails in the layers, good. If you can't get to wherever you stopped it, then just take a marker and just put an arrow over here to the side. And then later on, when you take it off the rails, you'll see that arrow and you'll be like, there was something I was supposed to do. Oh yeah, I need to bury those thread tails. So now you need to get it back to where that point is, and probably it's going to be somewhere back here. So now you're going to tap on repair pattern. And then what I like to do is just go ahead and move my needle back on back where the stitching is still good, shall we say, because I want to see how much it's lining up, okay? And usually it's really close, if not really accurate. And do not lean on your front rail. I did that to start out, and I would think I had it so perfect, and then I didn't, and it was because I was leaning on the rail. So be very careful not to do that. And we could have tapped on last stitch, which by the time you hit stop, it's usually um, gone on stitching and not really stitching. But we're going to say closest stitch, and for a pattern that's real intricate, it's a lot easier just to tap closest stitch. Okay, and now it's found the closest stitch. So you're watching to see is my needle over that stitch path. And if you're able to jog your needle down a little bit, not so that it's into the fabric, but just so it's a little bit closer down, sometimes that's easier to watch it track. So then you can trace forward. And you're watching to see, especially when it there's corners or points or a defined change of direction. Because if it lines up, say, with this bone where it turns from the straight edge to the rounded, if it follows that path, then you know you're pretty well lined up. So you're going to hit trace forward. It moves really fast in simulation mode. So I'm going to hit this. I'm going to go ahead and hit. Man, I can't even hardly stop it with where I want to. So once you've got it lined up, and these nudge keys, you can nudge your needle either across or up and down. But after you've used your nudge, do some more trace back and trace forward and make sure those points are lined up. And then you can, when you get it close, it'll be a lot easier to do on a live quilt than in simulation mode. But tap on that +1, okay, to get it to wherever you tied the thread tails, where you ended. So if that's exactly where the stitching ended, then you're going to pull your bobbin, and then you're going to pull that bobbin thread up, hold the thread tails, and then tap sew. And then when it ends, then do not tap finish zone just yet. It's so tempting to tap it, but don't, because you want to pull bobbin first. If you were to tap that, you know what it would do? It would drag all that precious bobbin thread down here to this corner. So you don't want to waste bobbin thread. So tap pull bobbin, okay? And and you'll be able to move your machine. If you're not, you can say release carriage. But move your machine a little couple of inches away, grab that thread, okay? Grab that thread and hold on to it, and then move it back to where the stitching ended. Take that single stitch, and then you're able to pull that bobbin thread up. The machine will move freely. So as you move the machine away, that bobbin loop pulls to the top, and you can grab that so that you have both ends, and then you'll be cutting that top thread and the loop of the bobbin. Okay, so um, then you're ready to, we're going to tap back. Then once you pull your bobbin, you're ready to tap finish sewn. So we're going to tap on that. And now it's going to move so that you can mark placement spots for when you advance your quilt and stitch the next zone. So this will be, once you advance your quilt, this will be A and that will be B. And remember we talked about the lowest stitch and the upper stitch being the same. So that's what's nice with having a non-nested pattern to start with, because you don't have to adjust A or B. The exact points it gives you are the points that you can use. So your marking method, it gives you three choices. You can use whatever you want, or maybe you just see where it is and use a blue marking pen. So it's whatever you want. We're just going to pretend that we put tape and a little piece of tape there, and when we say single stitch, it causes a hole to punch in that tape. And now we need to come over here, so we're going to say next mark. Okay. So it's going to travel over there, and we're going to take that single stitch in the tape, and now it flashed done. So we're ready to tap continue. And it's asking you, are you sure? Yes. Yeah, we got them both marked. So at this point, we would unclamp, and whatever you've done to hold your quilt top secure, you're going to unclamp, unclip, and then advance your quilt, baste up the sides again. And if you want to use your the buttons on your machine, you can go into this red toolbox and you can say release sewing machine. And this gives you manual control as if you weren't using QCT. This is also useful when you run out of a bobbin thread and you need to do some test stitches. Go to that red toolbox and say release sewing machine, and it'll give you that manual control. And don't tap on OK until you're done, because as soon as you tap on OK, the software's back in control. So we're going to say OK. So just to show you what's in that toolbox, if for some reason you did something and you want it to just, maybe you were playing with trace, okay? Maybe you were tracing to start out with, and with trace, the needle's not stitching. It's a way to just watch where the needle is moving to make sure something's going to hit where you want it to. So then you could say move to start point, and it'll go right to that green circle. You can reset your safe area. You can take a single stitch, and here's a single stitch and there's a single stitch. They work the same way. Release carriage is the same as this release carriage. It just allows your machine to move freely. QCT is still in control. If you want to make a measurement of something, tap on this yellow ruler here, and it just works as a built-in ruler. And then we already talked about release sewing machine gives you manual control. Based is a QCT based feature if you don't want to use the release sewing machine. But release sewing machine is faster because this based is very slow. It'll go up to speed 10, but it's slow. And you take that single stitch to pull your bobbin, and as soon as you tap on slow baste, it starts just methodically stitching, whether you move your machine or not. And what I have found this really helpful for is if I have an edge that has a little bit of fullness in, and I don't want to turn my iron on and spray starch and try and work that fullness out, I'm able to use my fingers to just kind of work that fullness in because of how slow it's basting. And then when you start that slow baste, you're able to stop it and pull your singles, do your single stitch to pull the bobbin, and then exit. So that's allowed you to get familiar with a lot of your options here. So now we're going to go back, and you would just continue to do this until you got to the bottom. Now let's say you get to the last part of your quilt top, and let's say where I'm going to tap is really where you want the lowest stitch to hit, because this is just a bunch of batting and you're like, boy, that's a lot of wasted stitching and thread. You really need it to not stitch any lower than there. That's what these partial diamonds are for. You just tap that, it cuts it right off, and it's going to do a straight line stitch across the bottom. It's saying out of safe area in pink, but that's normal for this feature. And this toggles it back full screen. So that's what that is for, is when you get to the bottom, you say, hey, this right here is where I want the lowest stitches to hit, and just tap right there. Okay, so we're gonna go back and let's do a pattern that is nested. And there's something that I want to show you. It's easy to forget when you're in simulation mode, but if I were on a live quilt top, I would tap on that yellow ruler, and then I would move my needle to where I want the furthermost left stitches to hit, and tap on the side there. This is your default one, and this is the one for measuring your quilt width, the one with the green slanted line. And then I would do the same thing over here. I would move my needle to where I wanted the furthermost stitches on the right to hit, and tap there. And now it's telling me that gives me a quilt width of 41 and a half, and I can say apply measurement. There's also another feature in here. You can tap there if you ever have two defined spots and you want to know what's the center between them. You can tap that little black sewing machine and it'll take you right to the center of those two places. So we're going to tap on apply measurement, and now it's got the 41, but I'm going to change it back to 40. Okay, but I want to show you a nested design, which that's the harder one when you're brand new. So if I were to tap reset, it just takes it back to one pattern, one row. If I tap the X, now it's completely gone. I'm going to say select pattern, and I'm going to select the dog tracks and say open. And this would actually work great as a border with the design that we just had. If we were doing a border, which would probably be just one single pattern across, it would probably be 4 inches height, probably. And let's see, we'll say max, and you would have more. But if this was your border, that's when you would place as a single pattern, and you get the placement choices of a block, which come in really handy when you're doing a border. So that's really nice. And those placement choices, there's varying ones. We're not going to go there. That would be a lot longer video. But some of the placement choices will allow you to set a margin, which is handy. You could say, well, I had it for 4 inches, but that is my border size, but I don't want it stitching to the seam line. So, in those choices over there, you can pick the fraction that you want it to stop short of stitching to the seam. So that's really nice. But we're going to go ahead and make this be bigger. I'm going to say 12. And let's see, we're going to say reset, and we're going to give it 2 rows. So I'm going to come down to this last row of hearts, and I'm going to add them until they're almost touching here. So now I'm going to go up to the top, and I don't want this wrapping because that's just some useless little stitching there at the side. So, and here you see they're not connected, and we're going to go up to the top. We're going to select that one. So I want to grow these so that this row nests into this one. So that's what a nested one is, where you're going to grow these patterns so that there's not a gutter between them. And there's no rule to go by. And you might even think, I like that, and you could leave it. So again, we want to make sure all rows are selected because we're going to grow them both in height. We're going to tap on size, which is already selected. And then that's where the step size comes in handy. So, I'm going to change it to small. Let's see what happens. I'm going to tap there, and I'll tap one more. I think I like that. I think I like that. I could tap on small and change it to tiny and fine tune if I wanted, but I think I like that. And you may not. You may think, I think that's a little close. So you could say tiny and then use the shrink, okay? You could do that. Okay, so when you've got it like you want it, then you're ready to save it because really we don't need to move this. We don't have anything to flip, and we certainly don't want to rotate this. Um, One thing else that we didn't really talk about, we talked about these hearts, and that has to do with horizontal nesting across. Okay, this column has to do with vertical, how the rows are fitting vertically. And that third selection of fit with this star not selected, this star is what lets wrapping go from the top to the bottom. So you certainly don't want to be quilting out wrapped rows going down your quilt. So this is the most common selection you'll use in plus, that third choice with no selection there. Okay, so we've got this like we want it, and you would save it, tap on that and save it. So for the first row, look at this big gap. That's an inch and a quarter. So that's not even enough for the binding to cover. So we need to do something about that gap. So now we're going to need to move both rows. So we're going to tap on move, okay? And then there's one more thing before we actually move it that I want you to see. And we're going to go into the magnifying glass. So you can tell right now that's the top, that's the highest stitch, that's the lowest stitch of a row. So we're going to come into here, tap down that row, and here's what we're looking at. For the top stitch, how far does that reach into the row above it? Because the amount of nesting the lower row does up into the row above it. Remember when we got the A and the B, the zone placement spots? We're going to have to adjust up from A and B the amount that this lower row nests up into the row above it. So this looks to me like we're going to call it a scant half inch. And if you want to make it easy on yourself, you could actually go into size and adjust it so that it's exactly pretty much half an inch. But we're going to go with a scant half inch. And then you may want to make a note of that or even take a picture and then say fit and then X, and then you're back in this screen. So now that we've figured that out, what is that nesting amount, then we want to tap on move. Okay, we need for these arrows to be active, to be in blue. So now we can tap on that top selection of fit, and nothing changes with our design, okay? And now we can tap on this and tiny is selected. I'm going to change it to small because that's what your steps do. When you're moving, it's determining the amount of movement. So we're going to tap up until I think that probably looks good. Sometimes I'll tap it so that I don't have a bunch of little stitching I don't want to waste my time with, so to speak, because the more it has to deal with little places, the longer it's going to take. But this is gonna the binding is gonna cover that, and it's gonna look like it flows off the edge. And but look at this. You have a gap down here, and QCT still considers this entire thing your zone, okay? So we're gonna say sew in zones, and we're gonna say no to the save. And let's go ahead and place our pattern. Okay, we'll place it right there. Okay. Okay, and so when it stitches, so you would pull bobbin, and so I'm going to skip some steps for the sake of time, but you would pull your bobbin before tapping sew. And then here at the end, you would definitely pull your bobbin, and then you would tap on finished. and then take your single stitch. So now you've got your A, next mark. Okay. And your single stitch, and then you're going to say continue because done flashed, yes. But now here's the issue is when we measured, it was with this gap. So and there's another thing that we need to do now. We need to tap on the X, okay? Because now we need to come back and we need for this to be back like it was. And you would open up the file that you saved that they were like this. Because now we need it like this, and we're going to say sew in zones. No. So when you place A, you're going to have to place it so that it's going to stitch right, but it's almost like you're gonna be adjusting up a little more than that scant 1/4 inch. So that's gonna be your trial for when you first start out. And we'll tap on B. But now once this stitches, okay, once this stitches, but we have pulled our bobbin and ah, so we're going to pretend that we pulled our bobbin and now it's stitching. And we're going to pretend we pulled our bobbin and we've said finished. And now we're now stitching a zone that looks normal. So we're going to say single stitch and then next mark. You would manually move your machine to save time and wear and tear on your belts. Take another single stitch and say continue. Yes. So, but here, what's nice now is you've got you've got your A and B for the next zone, but now you can safely measure up a scant 1/2 inch and you don't and you're good to go with the next zone. It's not like where you were going from the first one to the second one and you had to deal with that first zone being adjusted up at the top. So, but you can always trace and you may need to replace. So, that's just something that you have to learn with placing for that second zone. That's a challenge. That right there is enough for some people to say, I'm going to get pro. But I started out with beginnings and once I got used to it, I loved it. If I had to go back to beginnings now, I could. I would be fine. Because once you start seeing where your placement marks are, and especially if you're using the center placement where you just have one mark, you get really fast at it. You really do. And then after you've done a couple of zones and not counting the first weird one, if it's a nested, you can even, measure. You can see where the measurement is from this green circle to the next green circle. Now, after you've established a few, and you don't even have to bother with telling QCT to tell you where the next zone is. You can just see it. So that's just something to look forward to as you get more used to using Plus and you get faster at it. because once you get savvy with eyeballing where you need to, after you do a few zones, and then you see, you will get really fast by skipping that part about not having to let QCT tell you where the zone placement spots are. So just to give you something excited about. So I hope that I have helped you learn more about how to use Plus, and feel free to ask any questions and I'll answer them the best I can.